Fresh Ink is a VoxStories demo publication created to demonstrate the power of storytelling through the VoxStories audiobook platform creation. This project was developed to showcase how words, voice, and technology can merge to craft immersive self-help experiences that resonate deeply with listeners and readers alike. Introduction. Every story begins with a mark, a spark of intention, a moment of courage, a quiet declaration that something new is ready to emerge. We mark our days with choices, our hearts with experiences, and our minds with interpretations. Over time, those marks form the living manuscript of who we are. But what if we realize that the story isn't finished? What if the ink hasn't dried yet, and we still hold the pen? Fresh Ink is about rediscovering your creative authorship over your own life. It's an invitation to look at the pages you've written so far and decide, consciously, which ones you want to keep and which ones you're ready to rewrite. It's not about reinventing yourself from scratch, it's about returning to the truth that's been waiting beneath the noise of expectation. It's about reclaiming the power to edit the narrative that shapes your days, your relationships, and your sense of self. For years, many of us have been living inside the margins of old drafts, those inherited stories that tell us what kind of person we're supposed to be, how success should look, or what love must cost. These drafts are often written in invisible ink, in the habits we repeat without thinking, in the beliefs we absorbed before we could question them. They may have served us once, but they can also keep us bound to outdated versions of who we were. Growth begins when we finally read those lines clearly and realize they don't have to define the whole book. The process of rewriting isn't clean or linear, it's deeply human. There will be moments of resistance, chapters of confusion, and scenes where old words spill back onto new pages. Yet somewhere in that mess lies transformation. Creation is never just about perfect sentences, it's about authentic ones. Whether you're facing reinvention after loss, finally prioritizing your own joy, or simply questioning why your story feels stagnant, this book will meet you where you are with empathy, honesty, and tools for renewal. Each chapter will open new ways to see yourself as both author and artist of your life. You'll explore how to identify outdated storylines, redefine meaning, write through resistance, and edit with compassion. You'll learn how connection adds richness to rewriting and how sustainable change becomes the ink that lasts. By the time you reach the final pages, you'll not only have new perspective, you'll have begun writing with fresh language, deeper presence, and bolder choices. You don't need permission to start again. You only need awareness the moment you realize that every breath is an open page. Fresh Ink is that reminder. Life isn't a fixed text, it's a work in progress. You are not bound by what was written before. Every thought you reframe, every intention you set, every action you choose adds new color to the masterpiece that is still unfolding. So take a moment now, picture your own page untouched, waiting, and whisper to yourself, I can write this differently. Then let this book guide you as you begin. Chapter 1. Reimagining your personal canvas. Life has a way of marking us with stories, some beautiful, some painful, all deeply formative. Every decision, every mistake, every triumph leaves a trace on our personal canvas. Yet, it's easy to forget that the canvas is not fixed. The brush remains in your hand. You can cover old ink with new color. You can return to blank space and imagine something completely different. Reimagining your personal canvas begins with realizing that you are the artist of your own life. Many people live as though their pages are already written, as if they were only characters in someone else's plot. They replay old narratives, faithfully echoing the voices that once defined them. You're not good enough. You always mess things up. People like you don't do things like that. These lines might have been scribbled across your early chapters, but they don't have to dictate the next ones. The first act of self-authorship is awareness, the realization that you can pause mid-sentence and decide to rewrite. Imagine holding a paintbrush above a clean surface. That space of untouched possibility can feel intimidating at first. Blankness demands courage. It asks you to trust your own imagination more than your memories. But that emptiness is also freedom, an open invitation to explore who you might become without the weight of repetition. Your past strokes are not prisons. They're foundations, textures that give depth to the new colors you'll add. Letting go of old narratives doesn't mean erasing your history. It means giving yourself permission to reinterpret it. The heartbreak that hardened you might now become the lesson that softened you toward others. The failure that once defined you might transform into proof of your resilience. Our stories evolve when we view them through a different lens, when we decide that meaning is fluid, not fixed. Think about the metaphors you live by. Perhaps you've seen yourself as the survivor, the caretaker, the one who never finishes what they start. What if, for a moment, you stepped outside those roles? What if you called yourself the builder, the explorer, or simply the one who's still learning? Each new name shifts perspective. Each word becomes a brushstroke, shaping your identity anew. Intention is the first tool of creation. Before any ink hits the page, the artist must pause and imagine what they want to express. Take time to set your creative intentions for the life you're rewriting. Ask yourself, what would feel true if I weren't chasing anyone else's approval? What kind of story would make me proud to reread 10 years from now? The answers don't have to be perfect, they just need to be honest. Reimagining yourself isn't about inventing a better version for show, it's about returning to authenticity. So much of personal growth is not about adding more color, but uncovering the shades that were always underneath tones muted by self-doubt, comparison, and expectation. When you start painting again from that deeper place, what emerges isn't a stranger, it's your truest self coming into focus. As you turn the page into this next chapter of your life, remind yourself that the process will be messy, and that's what makes it real. Paint will drip, lines will blur. Some days, you look at what you've created and feel uncertain if it's progress or chaos. But every mark is movement, and movement is transformation. Creation rarely follows a straight line. It spirals, it loops back on itself, it surprises you. In those moments when fear whispers that it's too late or that change is too big, return to the canvas image. Picture that space in front of you wide open, waiting for new color, and remember, no story is ever final until you stop writing it. The life you live from this point forward is still wet ink. So take a deep breath. Stand before your inner canvas not with judgment but with curiosity. Touch the brush to the page gently, then boldly. Let color spread in directions you didn't plan. Trust yourself enough to make new marks without knowing exactly where they'll lead. And above all, know this. Every time you choose self-awareness over autopilot, intention over habit, love over fear, you are reimagining your personal canvas in real time. Chapter 2. Identifying the Old Draft. We all carry versions of ourselves written long ago, chapters we didn't consciously choose, but have lived as though they were final. These old drafts are made of beliefs, habits, and emotional imprints that repeat until we notice them. They tell us what's possible, who we're allowed to be, and what we must protect ourselves from. Some of these lines served a purpose once. They helped us survive, fit in, find safety. But over time, they can become cages dressed as comfort. The first step toward rewriting your life is learning to read what's already been written. Awareness turns invisible ink visible. Begin by observing your inner dialogues. Notice the patterns in your self-talk, the quiet sentences that run in the background of daily life. When you make a mistake, do you hear, "I knew I'd mess that up"? When you succeed, do you whisper, "It's not enough yet"? Those thoughts are not permanent truths. They're echoes from an older story still trying to stay relevant. Our old drafts often take shape through repetition. What we practice emotionally and mentally becomes familiar, and familiarity masquerades as truth. Pay attention to recurring scenarios where you feel stuck or reactive. Maybe it's the same argument with a partner, the same fear before risk, or the same fatigue after trying to please everyone. Behind each loop is a line in your story that needs rereading. Ask yourself, what belief is fueling this pattern? It might sound like, "I'm responsible for everyone's happiness," or "I'm not safe unless I control every outcome." Once recognized, these beliefs lose power. They shift from unquestioned narrative to editable text. Identifying an old draft requires compassion, not critique. You're not hunting for mistakes, you're uncovering origins. Trace your patterns back to their first appearance. Who taught you to think this way? What experience might have imprinted that lesson? Often, the beliefs we live by were born in moments of pain or confusion. They were coping mechanisms, not moral verdicts. When you see that, blame dissolves and clarity begins. Our habits are another form of autobiography. The way we start our morning, respond to love, or handle disappointment reflects pages written by repetition and emotion. If you've learned to distract yourself when discomfort arises, that habit says, "Avoiding pain keeps me safe." If you chase productivity over rest, maybe your story once equated worth with achievement. Instead of trying to fix these habits immediately, Simply name them. Naming is reading aloud what was previously whispered. Every label becomes a light, a way to see the architecture of your old script. Sometimes the old draft hides an emotional residue, the places where our hearts still hold punctuation marks of the past. A sudden rush of shame when someone praises you may reveal an unwritten rule about self-worth. An urge to withdraw after being misunderstood might echo an early chapter of rejection. These emotions are bookmarks pointing toward inner paragraphs that still need your attention. When they show up, pause and ask, whose voice is speaking? Is this mine now or someone else's from long ago? You might find it helpful to map your storyline visually. Write down significant events from your life and note the messages they taught you about yourself or the world. Patterns will surface like recurring motifs: fear of abandonment, drive for perfection, guilt around rest. Recognizing them on paper transforms internal mist into words, and words can be rewritten. Self-reflection tools help translate awareness into healing. Try journaling around prompts like, what roles have I been playing in other people's stories that no longer fit me? When do I feel most like I'm performing instead of living? What truths do I defend that secretly exhaust me? Which emotions seem louder than their current situation deserves, and where might they have begun? As you answer, remember that every realization is progress. You're not erasing identity, you're refining it. Old drafts are not failures, they are evidence that you've lived deeply enough to require updates. The moment you identify an old narrative is the moment it begins to loosen its grip. Awareness creates space between who you were and who you're becoming. In that space, choice reappears. You can keep reading the same lines or pick up the pen again. You can decide which stories still hold truth and which ones deserve closure. Take a quiet moment to consider which version of yourself has been writing lately, the one shaped by habit or the one guided by present intention. Notice how it feels in your body when each speaks. The old draft may sound familiar but heavy. The emerging voice will feel uncertain yet alive. The act of identifying isn't about judgment, it's about liberation through understanding. Every pattern recognized is a paragraph freed from invisibility. Every emotion acknowledged is ink turning clear under light. With that clarity, you begin to reclaim authorship, not by force, but by awareness. You don't have to tear the old pages out. They belong to your story's history. But from this chapter forward, let them serve as reference material, not commandments. Thank them for what they taught you, then gently set them aside as you ready new paper. Because once you see your old draft clearly, you realize something profound. The story was never meant to end there. Chapter 3. The Power of Redefinition. Redefinition is the act of reclaiming authorship. It's the moment you look at a word, a belief, or a version of yourself and realize it no longer fits. It's when you pause in the middle of the story and ask, who am I now, really? Not who I was taught to be, not who I've been habitually performing, but who I'm ready to become when truth replaces expectation. To redefine is to remember your ability to choose definition instead of inherit it. We often build identities like walls, protective structures shaped by old meanings. You might say, I'm not creative, or I'm bad at relationships, as if these are fixed facts rather than temporary interpretations, but every identity is written in erasable ink. Who you were then does not limit who you can be now unless you keep reading those sentences as law instead of notes. Redefinition begins when curiosity enters. What else could this mean? What else could I be? Your life expands in proportion to the meanings you update. Words like failure, strength, vulnerability, and success transform depending on the lens through which you read them. Maybe failure once meant humiliation. What if now it meant courage practiced publicly? Maybe vulnerability used to mean weakness. What if now it meant connection unguarded? Every time you shift meaning, you shift reality. Nothing changes externally until something redefines internally. Consider an artist reimagining their medium painting over old lines, not to destroy them, but to reveal what lies beneath. In this same way, redefinition doesn't erase history. It converses with it. It turns pain into wisdom, endings into beginnings, wounds into invitation. Ask yourself, what story have I been telling about this part of me? What truth wants to replace it? When you redefine, you step out of reaction and into creation. Instead of reacting to how things have always been labeled, you begin naming them fresh. You redefine worth not by productivity, but presence. You redefine love not by sacrifice, but honesty. You redefine happiness not by perfection, but peace. This mental rewriting isn't just philosophy, it's practical transformation. It informs how you show up in your relationships, your work, your body, and your dreams. Core values are your compass through redefinition. They are the words that anchor your choices while giving shape to new meaning. If your values are authenticity, compassion, and growth, then any redefinition you make must align with those truths. For instance, authenticity may ask you to release titles that sound impressive but feel hollow. Compassion may ask you to soften self-criticism long enough to let change occur with kindness. Growth may ask you to view discomfort as evidence of expansion, not failure. Take time to name your personal values, the words that feel alive when you speak them. Notice where your current definitions contradict them. That friction is where redefinition happens. Between who you've been and who you're becoming lies a vocabulary waiting to evolve. Vision gives redefinition direction. It's one thing to release old meanings, it's another to translate your new ones into clear intention. Imagine describing your best self not as perfection but as congruence, someone whose thoughts, actions, and emotions align around chosen meanings. What would your days look like if your inner dialogue matched your deepest values? Maybe success would look quieter yet fuller. Maybe confidence would sound less like self-assurance and more like self-trust. Identity isn't static, it's fluid by design. We are living stories constantly revised by experience and reflection. To deny that flow is to deny life itself. When you permit identity to evolve, you free yourself from contradiction and guilt for changing your mind. You realize that being consistent doesn't mean staying the same. It means staying true to growth. So much peace comes from allowing yourself new language. Perhaps I'm broken becomes I'm in repair. I'm lost becomes I'm exploring. I'm behind becomes I'm unfolding at my own pace. These gentle shifts move entire emotional landscapes. Redefinition is compassion translated into vocabulary, a way of granting yourself permission through a different lens. In moments of transition, remind yourself, redefinition isn't betrayal. Outgrowing old definitions doesn't disrespect who you were. It honors evolution by recognizing new truth. The caterpillar doesn't mourn the cocoon. It acknowledges that protection was once needed, but flight is now possible. You are allowed to outgrow what once held you safely. To practice redefinition daily, pay attention to the words that feel heavy when you repeat them. Each one signals meaning overdue for review. Write them down and ask, does this still tell the truth about me? If not, rename it intentionally. Say aloud the new definition until it feels real enough to live by. Language shapes thought, thought shapes action, action rewrites existence. Redefinition isn't something that happens once, it's a lifelong rhythm of renewal. As circumstances evolve, meaning must evolve too. The person you are today will one day be an outdated version unless you keep editing perception with awareness and compassion. And that's the power within this chapter, realizing that change begins in words long before it manifests in form. Every sentence you rewrite about yourself becomes new ink across the page of possibility. Because ultimately, redefinition leads to liberation. The freedom to see yourself not as fixed text, but as fluid expression, alive, unfinished, and beautifully capable of becoming more. Chapter 4. Writing Through Resistance. Resistance is the shadow side of creation, an invisible force that rises the moment you move toward growth. It's the quiet whisper that says, not today, the subtle weight that slows your hand as you reach for the pen, the mental fog that convinces you it's safer to wait. Every time we try to write a new chapter in our lives, resistance appears not as punishment, but as proof that we're moving toward change. To work through resistance is to learn how to keep writing even when the story fights back. Resistance often disguises itself as procrastination, doubt, or fatigue, but at its root, it's fear. Fear of exposure, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of unknown identity. When you change your inner narrative, you're stepping into unfamiliar territory. The old self knows how to survive there. The emerging self doesn't yet know how to live. So your mind slows the process down, trying to keep you safe. The irony is that resistance doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, it means you're doing something right. Growth activates discomfort, discomfort signals transformation underway. Instead of trying to eliminate resistance, approach it as a conversation. When hesitation surfaces, ask gently, what are you trying to protect me from? Often, the answer reveals a vulnerable truth you fear: disappointing someone, revisiting failure, or losing comfort. Once named, that fear loses its invisibility. You can answer it with compassion rather than punishment. Tell your fear, I hear you. But we're ready now. This inner dialogue turns resistance into cooperation. It acknowledges that the part of you afraid of change simply needs reassurance. Curiosity is the antidote to fear. When you meet resistance with curiosity instead of judgment, it transforms from an obstacle into energy. The next time your motivation fades, try asking yourself, what story am I believing right now that's making this hard? Maybe it's the story that says change must be perfect, or that effort only matters if it guarantees success. These beliefs are the ink stains smudging your progress. They were written long ago and can be rewritten now. Curiosity lets you observe them without shame. Real progress is rarely built on inspiration alone, it's sustained by structure. Resistance loses strength when rhythm replaces emotion. Establish small rituals that remind your body and mind that creation is a habit, not a mood. Write for 10 minutes even when you don't feel ready. Sit quietly each morning and choose one intention for the day. Every repetition becomes proof that action is possible before certainty arrives. Momentum doesn't come from convincing yourself, it comes from beginning anyway. Sometimes the hardest part isn't knowing what to do, it's believing you deserve to do it. Self-worth plays an enormous role in resistance. We delay growth because we secretly think we haven't earned peace or haven't suffered enough to deserve joy. But your worth is not negotiated through struggle, it's already woven into your existence. The act of creation is your right, not your reward. When you remember this truth, resistance starts to weaken because its foundation unworthiness collapses. Writing through resistance also means learning to tolerate imperfection. The human tendency to wait until we feel ready is resistance dressed as preparation. Readiness is not a feeling, it's a choice that happens amidst uncertainty. The blank page of a new life doesn't need flawless words, it needs honest ones. Start by writing sentences that wobble, making decisions that feel incomplete, taking steps that look clumsy. Progress born from authenticity outlasts progress born from pressure. Each imperfect mark reminds you that truth matters more than polish. In moments when resistance feels physical, when tension sits in your chest or your thoughts spiral toward self-doubt, pause and reconnect with presence. Notice your breath. Feel your feet grounded beneath you. You don't have to fight resistance head-on. Sometimes you only need to outlast its first wave. It's like waiting for storm clouds to pass. You hold steady until visibility returns. Stillness isn't avoidance, it's recalibration. There will be seasons when creative energy feels absent altogether, when the ink dries and you wonder if your spark has disappeared. In these times, patience becomes part of the writing process. It's okay to rest between paragraphs of transformation. Resistance sometimes signals fatigue rather than fear, a reminder to nurture rather than push. Tend to yourself like an artist caring for their tools. Rest your mind, refill with beauty, rekindle curiosity through simple pleasures. Then return when energy stirs again, the page will still be waiting. Every act of perseverance rewrites identity. Each time you choose awareness over avoidance, action over anxiety, honesty over perfection, you are redrafting who you believe yourself to be. The person who used to surrender at discomfort now learns endurance. The one who feared rejection learns courage through small steps into vulnerability. Resistance becomes evidence of becoming the friction that confirms you are editing life from autopilot into intention. If growth feels like climbing uphill without knowing where the summit lies, remember, writing through resistance isn't about reaching the end faster. It's about learning how to breathe within the climb. The page doesn't demand speed, it asks for sincerity. You don't have to write perfectly, you only need to write truly. So when resistance whispers again telling you to stop rewriting, to stay familiar, meet it with compassion but keep the pen moving. Whisper back, I'm still here. Each sentence you add replaces hesitation with courage. Each choice reshapes possibility into progress. Because in the end, resistance is not the enemy of creation, it's its companion. It appears wherever transformation begins, guarding the doorway between who you were and who you're becoming. The secret is not to defeat it, but to move with it, to write through it until fear turns into flow and hesitation into ink. That is how stories continue through presence, practice, and persistence written one brave line at a time. Chapter 5. The Editing Process of Self-Growth. Growth, like writing, is not just about creation, it's about refinement. At some point, every author must step back from their work and look at what's on the page with discernment, to ask what still rings true and what no longer belongs. The same is true in life. Self-growth isn't only about adding more, it's about editing wisely. It's learning how to sift through your thoughts, actions, and emotions with compassion instead of criticism, revising what no longer serves your evolving story. Editing begins with awareness, but deepens through honesty. To grow, you must be willing to see where your sentences run too long, those repeated patterns or habits that clutter your inner narrative. You must notice where fear has added unnecessary punctuation, where perfectionism has over-explained, where self-doubt has crossed out potential before it had a chance to breathe. Growth invites you to become your own editor, not ruthless, but tenderly precise. Your goal isn't to delete who you are, it's to bring clarity to who you're becoming. Consider how an editor looks at writing. They highlight strengths even as they suggest changes. They know that every cut or rearrangement is made to strengthen meaning. In your emotional life, editing works the same way. When you pause to review your reactions or relationships, when you question whether your routines reflect intention or autopilot, you're making editorial decisions on the shape of your becoming. Does this belief still express my truth? Does this behavior align with my values? These questions refine your personal manuscript one choice at a time. Self-editing is not self-criticism, it's self-compassion expressed through awareness. The difference lies in motive. Criticism punishes, while editing uplifts. When you notice emotional patterns and decide to adjust them, you're offering yourself kindness through alignment. You might catch moments when you speak harshly to yourself and gently rewrite those sentences into encouragement. You might notice how you chase validation and decide to replace those chapters with self-trust. Each revision teaches you that you are worthy of constant improvement without shame. One of the most profound acts of editing happens in silence when you pause before reacting and choose presence instead. That pause is the comma between impulse and wisdom. It's a simple mark, yet it changes everything about tone and pacing. In growth, silence becomes the moment where clarity forms. You begin hearing which parts of your story are written from fear and which are born from love. And once you can tell the difference, editing becomes effortless. You keep love on the page and release what was written in fear. The process of refining yourself often stirs vulnerability because it means facing imperfection directly. But the truth is, imperfection is what gives the story depth. The goal isn't to make every paragraph of your life flawless, it's to make it authentic. When you look at your chapters with compassion, you'll start celebrating progress rather than perfection. A well-edited life doesn't erase mistakes, it organizes them into meaning. Just as an editor tracks progress through versions and notes, developing clarity habits helps anchor growth into daily life. Perhaps each evening you reflect briefly. What felt aligned today? What needs revision tomorrow? Or once a week you journal a few sentences about emotional tone, what strengthened joy, what drained energy, what deserves rewriting next time. These are the small adjustments that create steady transformation. Awareness becomes routine. Alignment becomes rhythm. Growth also involves recognizing when not to over-edit. There's beauty in leaving space for spontaneity moments when joy interrupts logic or uncertainty reveals creativity. Editing with care means knowing when to stop revising long enough to let life breathe. You don't have to control every paragraph. Some lines need freedom to teach their own lessons. Wisdom emerges not from perfect control, but from intentional attention. Throughout this process, compassion acts as your guiding principle. When old thoughts surface, regrets, insecurities, patterns you thought were gone, meet them as notes in the margin rather than flaws in the text. They're reminders of how far you've come, not evidence you've failed. Replace judgment with gentleness. Replace "I should be better" with "I am learning." This shift turns editing into healing. Self-growth thrives on pacing. It asks for patience through revision after revision. You won't change overnight, just as no book is perfected in one sitting. But each act of reflection sharpens clarity. Each small choice reveals truth more precisely. Over time, your life begins to read smoother. Intentions align with actions. Decisions follow meaning rather than fear. Days feel congruent instead of scattered. Eventually, you realize that editing isn't about creating a polished version of yourself. It's about removing distortion until your natural voice emerges unfiltered. You're not meant to sound like anyone else. The point is to sound like you, clearly and courageously. So take another loving look at your story today. Where are the tangled sentences, the places where you shrink or silence yourself? Where are the bright lines, the ones that fill you with peace or purpose? Keep what honors your evolution. Release what repeats old wounds. Rewrite what requires truth. And then, when your inner pages feel rearranged and lightened by awareness, remember this. Editing is never a final act, it's a continuous conversation between who you were and who you're becoming. Each revision makes you clearer, freer, more authentically expressed. That's the art of self-growth, not rewriting life out of regret, but revising it through presence until every word reads honest. Chapter 6. Collaboration and Connection. In every story, there comes a moment when the protagonist realizes they cannot journey alone. No matter how solitary the act of writing may seem, every author is shaped by the presence of others through conversation, shared experience, and the reflections that come from connection. In life, collaboration and connection are the margins where your story meets someone else's, where meaning expands beyond the boundaries of self, growth deepens when shared. While earlier chapters have explored rewriting your personal narrative from within, this part of the process invites you to open your pages outward. The truth is, transformation doesn't happen in isolation. We learn ourselves through interaction, through feedback, perspective, and vulnerability. Every connection becomes a mirror, showing us the sentences we've overlooked or the strengths we forgot we wrote. Sometimes collaboration looks like partnership, the kind that challenges you with new ideas, new angles, and honest reflection. Other times, it's found in community, in the people who hold space for your evolution without demanding perfection. What they offer isn't authorship over your story, but companionship along its creation. They remind you that growth doesn't have to be lonely work. You can co-write certain chapters without losing your unique voice. Authentic connection thrives on mutual presence. It's less about agreement and more about understanding. When two people speak truthfully, without pretense or self-protection, something remarkable happens. Both stories begin to evolve. You start hearing yourself more clearly through the rhythm of shared insight. The conversation becomes a kind of editing process where compassion replaces criticism and curiosity replaces judgment. But authenticity requires courage. To truly connect, you must risk being seen, and that often means showing your messy drafts, not just your polished lines. Vulnerability is the ink that binds meaningful relationships. It's what transforms surface interactions into genuine communion. When you admit uncertainty, when you let someone read the parts of you still in revision, you open the door for honest collaboration. You invite reality to shape you kindly. Connection also means feedback, and feedback is a gift disguised as challenge. It's uncomfortable to be read closely by others, to have your blind spots or inconsistencies reflected back. Yet those reflections are essential parts of co-creation. When someone questions your assumptions or offers a new interpretation, they're not invalidating your story, they're expanding its vocabulary. The key is to listen with openness rather than defense, to translate critique into clarity. Surrounding yourself with people who genuinely want you to flourish changes everything about your trajectory. Mentors, peers, friends all bring perspectives that widen your world. A mentor can guide you toward truths you can't yet articulate. A peer can walk beside you through doubt. A supportive friend can remind you of your worth when self-belief fades. True support never rewrites your story for you. It holds the light while you keep writing. Collaboration isn't only about learning from others, it's also about giving what you've gained. Growth becomes sustainable when it circulates. Share what helped you rewrite a difficult chapter. Offer empathy to those still finding their voice. In giving wisdom away, it becomes embodied within you even more deeply. Compassion multiplied through connection turns knowledge into legacy. To connect meaningfully doesn't mean saying yes to everyone's energy. Boundaries protect authenticity. Collaboration works best when grounded in respect and balance, when both people remain accountable to truth rather than performance. You can love generously without losing autonomy. You can collaborate without codependence. Connection thrives where individuality is honored. Think of life like a collective anthology. Each person contributes their unique tone and perspective to a larger story about humanity itself. When two lives intersect honestly, both archives expand. Perhaps your greatest transformation won't come from the solitary rewrite, but from a moment when someone else's courage sparked your own, when listening became as powerful as expression. Take time to ask yourself, who helps me write better pages emotionally, creatively, spiritually? And just as importantly, for whom can I be that kind of mirror? Relationships evolve as we do. Some will fade when their purpose concludes, while others will deepen into lifelong collaboration. Both have value, they shape the arc of your narrative with wisdom and grace. As you practice connection consciously, notice how it alters your inner dialogue. You'll start using more inclusive language in thought, we instead of I, understanding instead of judgment. The world becomes less about competing stories and more about shared chapters of learning and empathy. Collaboration teaches you humility, the realization that even your most personal revelation exists within a web of collective truth. Life's richest writing emerges in dialogue with mentors, with nature, with art, with the quiet pulse of community around you. Let these exchanges soften you where past isolation hardened you. Let them edit your cynicism into trust again. Let them remind you that being human is itself a collaborative act. Because in the end, no masterpiece is made alone. Your transformation ripples outward through everyone touched by it, the friends who encouraged your new beginning, the stranger inspired by your honesty, the loved one healed by your presence. Their ink mingles with yours in ways that cannot be separated. Each connection becomes a note in the symphony of renewal, proving the most powerful stories are not written in solitude but in shared becoming. When you allow collaboration to shape your evolution, your own story doesn't diminish, it multiplies in meaning, echoing through every life it touches. We write better when we write together, when our hearts stay open enough to let another sentence complete our own. Chapter 7. Ink That Lasts, Sustainability and Change. Change without sustainability is like ink that fades before it dries. It might look bold in the beginning, full of conviction and color, but without care it begins to blur, losing definition over time. The real art of transformation lies not in creating bursts of progress, but in cultivating the kind of consistency that endures. Sustainability is what turns inspiration into identity. We often fall in love with beginnings, the excitement of a fresh start, the glow of possibility. But every lasting change survives on what happens after the momentum fades. The euphoria of rewiring your story will eventually face the quiet of routine, where motivation softens into maintenance. This is where most people abandon the rewrite, when it stops feeling new. Yet that's also where authenticity begins to take root. The moment change becomes ordinary is the moment it begins to belong to you. To sustain transformation, it must live in both intention and structure. Intention fuels, meaning it reminds you why you started. Structure anchors that meaning into daily life. It ensures that your choices align even when passion ebbs. Think of structure as the rhythm beneath the melody of growth, not restrictive, but supportive, keeping harmony when emotion fluctuates. Create rituals, small, repeatable moments that keep you grounded in your values. They don't have to be grand gestures. A morning walk to reconnect with awareness, a nightly reflection, a deep breath before reacting, they are each lines of reinforcement carved into habit. Rituals are the scaffolding of sustainability. They transform change from an event into a lifestyle. When something becomes habit, it's no longer dependent on willpower. It's guided by design. In this way, growth becomes not something you chase, but something you inhabit. Still, sustainability doesn't mean rigidity. True endurance is flexible. It bends with seasons without breaking. Life will always shift circumstances, emotions, environments, and what worked once may not fit later. Resilience emerges from responsiveness, the ability to adjust while holding on to essence. Ask yourself regularly, what needs to evolve for my growth to remain alive? This question honors movement instead of demanding perfection. It keeps your journey fluid, a living dialogue between stability and adaptation. Maintenance requires compassion. When we slip from our intentions, we often default to guilt, interpreting setback as failure. But sustainability is built on forgiveness as much as discipline. You're not meant to perform change flawlessly, you're meant to live it authentically. Each deviation is data, not defeat. Each return is renewal. The goal is never unbroken streaks, but ongoing awareness. Consider the metaphor of ink again. When pressure is too heavy, it bleeds. When too light, it skips. Sustainability is found in balance, the steady flow between effort and ease. Growth that lasts feels natural because it aligns with your core rhythm, not someone else's pace or expectation. Instead of striving for intensity, prioritize integration. Let your new values weave so thoroughly through your days that they no longer feel like something you have to remember, they simply become how you move through the world. There will be times when energy dips, when purpose feels distant or progress invisible. In those moments, return to maintenance through reconnection rather than reaction. Revisit what first lit your spark, a passage you underlined, a feeling you wanted to embody, a vision that once whispered possibility through doubt. Then ask gently, What's one small action today that honors that spark? Big change often reignites through small faithfulness. Community also sustains change. The conversations and companions that inspired you earlier can serve as reminders when self-discipline wavers. Surround yourself with people and environments that reflect your desired direction, voices that call you back to truth instead of temptation toward old patterns. Sustainability thrives where accountability and empathy meet, where people remind each other not just who they want to be, but who they already are when aligned. And don't overlook joy as a sustaining force. Too often we associate growth with effort alone, discipline, focus, persistence, forgetting that joy replenishes energy in ways struggle never can. Make room for what delights you within your new story. Joy is the ink that doesn't fade because it nourishes rather than depletes the spirit that writes. Over time, sustainable change becomes less about holding on and more about embodying. It no longer feels like work, it feels like truth lived consistently enough to become second nature. The new narrative stops being something you practice, it becomes simply who you are. So when you think about the life you're rewriting, don't ask only how to begin, ask how to stay. Ask what habits will hold peace when passion quiets, what rituals will preserve clarity when distraction calls, what relationships will remind you of your essence when old scripts try to return. Because the true masterpiece isn't the first stroke of ink, it's the line that still shines years later. Your transformation deserves durability. It deserves support through grace, rhythm through structure, joy through practice. Let your new ink set slowly into permanence, not by force, but by faithful repetition grounded in authenticity. That's how stories endure, not because they were written fast or flawlessly, but because they were tended long enough for truth to stain the page completely. Chapter 8: Publishing Your New Story. Every story eventually reaches the point where it's ready to be shared. After all the revising, reflecting, and rewriting, there comes a moment when you lift your head from the page, take a breath, and realize that creation is not complete until it's lived. Publishing your new story isn't about printing words or chasing an audience, it's about embodying truth so fully that it becomes visible through the way you speak, move, love, and lead. It's the decision to live your rewritten narrative out loud. You have spent pages turning inward, tracing old lines and authoring new ones. Now, this chapter invites you to walk into the world as evidence of your own evolution. When your inner transformation meets outer expression, authenticity begins. Publishing is an act of courage, of choosing visibility over safety, honesty over perfection. Your life becomes an open text through which others can read possibility. Expression doesn't always look grand or public. Sometimes it is quiet and intimate, a conversation held with integrity, an apology that releases old weight, a choice that matches your values rather than your fears. Other times it blooms louder in a project you share, a career change that reflects joy instead of obligation, a boundary spoken clearly without apology. What matters is not the scale of the act, but the alignment behind it. Every authentic action is a publication of your soul's truth. To publish your new story means living with integrity even when no one is watching. It means making decisions guided by the chapter you've consciously written rather than the one you've outgrown. Integrity is consistency between intention and action, the invisible ink of character that others may never see yet always feel. Each time you stand by your truth, even quietly, you reinforce the narrative of who you've become. Still, stepping into visibility can feel vulnerable. There's risk in being seen differently, especially when parts of the world prefer the old edition of you. Some will misunderstand your rewrite. Others may cling to outdated chapters because they feel safer there. But remember, you are not writing for universal approval, you are writing for authenticity. The right readers, the people whose hearts resonate with your truth, will recognize themselves in your pages, and those connections will form naturally when you stop self-editing for acceptance. The more you live from your new pages, the less you'll need to explain them. Energy speaks louder than explanation. Embodiment is communication in its purest form. Your calm where there was once chaos, your groundedness where there was once defensiveness, your joy emerging where silence once lived. These are the living paragraphs of your story made real. Think of each day as distribution, a way your truth travels beyond you. The kindness you offer to a stranger, the creative work that carries your values, the boundaries you uphold with grace, all of these actions carry your signature. They ripple outward, subtle but lasting, marking the world with the tone of your transformation. When you live this way consistently, inspiration becomes contagious. your courage grants permission to others still hesitating at the edge of their own revision. Publishing does not demand perfection, it requires participation. You don't need to feel entirely finished before living your story publicly. No author ever does. Growth continues between editions. Evolution doesn't end with release. Let your life remain a living work, corrected daily by awareness, adapted by compassion, and illuminated by experience. The goal isn't to freeze this new version forever, it's to keep sharing who you are becoming in real time. As you integrate this chapter, remember that every story touches more than its author. When you choose authenticity over performance, presence over pretense, you become part of a collective movement toward truthfulness in living. The ink you've bled into your pages becomes a mirror for those who need to see what's possible after change, proof that self-renewal is not abstract but tangible, embodied through everyday choices. So step into your next morning as publication day, not with announcement or fanfare, but with quiet certainty. Let how you listen reflect compassion. Let how you work reveal intention. Let how you love demonstrate freedom instead of fear. Life will read these choices as new text, a declaration that transformation didn't stop at reflection, it expanded into existence. And when doubts appear, as they sometimes will, remember that no meaningful story ever reaches its readers without vulnerability in its margins. Each time you live honestly, despite uncertainty, you add another paragraph to a legacy written in courage rather than caution. This is how self-authorship reaches beyond the page and into the world, through one embodied truth at a time. The pen remains in your hand, but now it moves through action instead of words. Each conversation, each choice, each expression becomes ink made visible. You are no longer merely rewriting, you're living the rewrite. And that is what it means to publish, to let your life itself become the book that teaches by example, shining proof that every story can begin again. Conclusion. Every page you've turned throughout this book leads back to a single truth. You are both the writer and the work of art. Life is not a finished manuscript, it's an evolving conversation between who you've been and who you're becoming. The ink that shapes your story remains wet, ready for your next sentence, your next choice, your next redefinition. The purpose of fresh ink has never been to give you a script to follow, but to awaken your awareness that the pen was always in your hand. You've explored how to reimagine your personal canvas, identify outdated drafts, redefine identity, write through resistance, edit with compassion, connect deeply, sustain change, and finally, embody your new story in daily life. Each element weaves together into a living philosophy. That transformation isn't an act of escape, it's an act of remembrance. You're not trying to become someone different, you're remembering how to be fully yourself. As you step beyond these pages, notice the subtle courage already unfolding within you, the way you pause before reacting, the way you listen more gently, the way you recognize patterns without judgment. These are the marks of someone who is consciously rewriting. Growth lives in moments so small they often look ordinary until seen in hindsight. Let those moments be your ongoing ink. Let them remind you that renewal doesn't require reinvention, it only asks for intention. Life will continue to edit itself around you. Seasons will shift, relationships will evolve, and meaning will keep changing form. You don't have to cling to any single version of your story. Writing yourself anew is not a one-time act, but a lifelong rhythm unfolding through awareness, curiosity, and compassion. Each time you choose presence over habit or honesty over fear, another chapter deepens. Remember that authorship doesn't mean control, it means creation through participation. You cannot predict every plot twist, but you can choose how to narrate it with grace, humor, patience, and faith in your unfolding. Even uncertainty becomes a character worth befriending, it keeps the story alive. The beauty of being human is the privilege of revision. When you close this book, don't think of these words as an ending. Think of them as an open page waiting for your breath, the next act of courage that says, "I'm ready to write again." Your life will never be printed in permanence. It will always be rewritten by choice, experience, and love. So let this be your quiet invitation. Keep writing with awareness, editing with compassion, connecting with courage, and publishing through presence. Fill your days not with pressure to perfect, but with permission to live truthfully, and watch how your story expands in color and meaning. Because in every sentence of intention lies evidence of becoming. And in every mark you make with fresh ink, you prove that no story ever truly ends. It simply continues through the hand of the one brave enough to keep writing.